Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Speed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you this hour as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. 1904 release this week, guys and girls, everybody. It has been an exciting ride. You know, typically when we see new releases come out from Canonical, I can kind of predict what kind of release it's going to be. If it's going to be an LTS release, chances are they're going to take some time and hone the software. They're going to polish the release. It's going to be a very polished and very precise release because they're going to have to support it for 5 years, and there is a significant portion of the people that utilize Ubuntu that are only going to use the LTS edition. And so for that reason, we typically don't see a lot of features being introduced in the LTS. Now, the other side of that is when you have a point release in between the LTS, a lot of times what you will see is that you find a lot of features that are coming out. And what we saw with this release was there weren't a lot of features. Instead, there was a lot of polish. And frankly, I think that was a really great choice on Canonical's part. 1904 Disco Dingo breaks us from that expectation. They have a lot of refinements. They don't give us a lot of really new great features, but this is a good thing, and I will explain why in just a moment. 1904 ships with kernel 5.0 Mesa 19, which is the latest release of the open source graphics drivers. Now, there's not a lot of huge changes, and so if you boot into a machine, and I've been running it all week, you're not going to notice massive changes above the hood, but under the hood, they have done some serious performance enhances, and the first time you boot the machine, what you're going to notice is it boots really fast. I mean, the thing just flies. And that's noticeable right away. GNOME, it's shipping with GNOME, I believe it's 3.32. And there are a number of different bug fixes that have occurred. What you have to understand about the GNOME desktop is there were a lot of problems that had popped up with the GNOME desktop, and previous to Ubuntu users using it, as much resources as my beloved Red Hat company has, they don't have the same amount of desktop users that a company like Canonical has. And so when you start to ship software at the level that Canonical is shipping software, and you begin to take on the user base at the level at which Canonical takes on a user base, you find very quickly that there are a lot of problems that weren't previously known or weren't previously, talked about very frequently, right? They were just kind of either swept under the rug or didn't bug enough people, or people like me. I'm the Walmart of Linux users, right? I find a way to work around the problems. I just go, it's a free operating system. What do you expect? We'll work around it, right? It takes a lot to get me twisted out of shape. And so a lot of us just go, just a bug in Linux. It'll get worked out eventually. When you start rolling out at the scale that Canonical is rolling out, that's when you start to see bug reports pop up. And they have the opportunity to address those and fix those. And so what you found is with GNOME 3.32 that is shipping with 1904, a lot of those desktop bugs have been worked out. Disco Dingo also comes with a new software package that I was pleasantly able to play with that allows you to track and locate files. And the way it's doing that is it's saving file metadata to a database, and that makes searching in the system much faster. Now, one of the primary workflows, if I can use that term, in GNOME is the ability to hit the super key. And for those of you who don't know what the super key is, the same thing as a Windows key or the Mac OS key or whatever you want to call it, but it's a super key. And you press that button and you begin to search for whatever thing you want to do. So if you want to open Firefox, you type Firefox. If you want to open Chrome, you type Chrome. If you want to open Thunderbird, you type Thunderbird. Now, previously, if you wanted to search for a file, if you wanted to open, let's say, a document that you had been working on, well, that was a little bit different because the search wasn't quite as fast. And so what Tracker allows you to do is search your system based on that metadata. And because it's stored in a local database, it's very quick. And so you're able to find a file on your system, or you're able to search your system very quickly. The other thing, and this is something that I think Canonical has really nailed, the Yaru theme pack, the Yaru themes icon pack. They've had a little bit of refinement. And one of the things that I've always hated about GNOME, so much to the point that I did an entire episode on how terrible of a implementation of GNOME this is the fact that GNOME is pretty ugly out of the box. I don't find GNOME to be a pretty desktop out of the box. The stock GNOME experience, I think, is pretty ugly. And one of the things that and this is not specific to 1904. This happened the very first release that Canonical came out with GNOME shipping as the default desktop. They did a very excellent job of holding the user's hand and delivering a desktop experience on GNOME that felt very similar, if not almost identical, to Unity. So much to the point that I have clients and family members and friends that are using GNOME on Ubuntu and have not realized that they are using an entirely different desktop environment. Additionally, it would further confuse them if I told them that Canonical pulled this off in just 2 releases. It's not difficult to ship a usable GNOME desktop infrastructure into releases, right? Because GNOME was an actively maintained project, the default desktop shipped by the largest open source company in the United States. But to take that experience and get it to mimic the experience of a completely, entirely different desktop environment, I thought that was something that Canonical did very well. And they've continued to refine on this idea of creating a very good stock-looking desktop. So when you install 1904 and it boots up for the first time, there's very little things aesthetically that you want to change. It's a very inviting environment that looks modern and clean and cool and new, and if I dare say hip. Kapavik in the chat room says, I wish I liked GNOME. I'd like to play with some Pop! OS. I would check it out. I mean, I think Pop! OS has definitely distinguished itself, and they continue to iterate. I've said this before in the program. I'll maintain again. It's not for me. I'm just not the user for Pop! OS. But I'm glad that there's competition in that market, and I'm glad System 76 is taking control of the operating system that they're shipping to their customers. I think that's a good business decision on their part, even if it's not for me personally. They have added an option in the Grub boot menu to make your system boot into safe graphics mode. Now, this option boots your system with the no mode set to help resolve graphic cards issues. Now, I will bet you, if I went back into our ticket logs at Altispeed Technologies, and I were to look, the number one call that we get that I can count on coming in at least twice a month, 3 times a month, maybe even once a week, is there's a flash drive plugged into my computer, they don't know that, right? They just say the computer boots and says no system disk or disk error. Is there a flash drive plugged in? No. Could you please look? There's not. Look, please. Oh yeah, there. Why would that keep the computer from booting? Could you remove it, please, and try and restart the computer? Oh, that works. That call comes in. I can count on it 2-3 times a month. By far, the second most common issue that I get is somebody calling in and saying, hey, we tried to do a Linux install, or we tried to upgrade, or whatever it was we tried to do, and my computer boots up to a black screen. And the answer, almost every single time, add no mode set, reboot, and then add no mode set to the end right before quiet, and boot that argument, and all of a sudden your graphics are going to come back. So I think it's really cool that they have addressed that and added a graphics safe mode that allows you to boot straight into there. So now we can just tell clients, hey, you know what, just when you're booting the computer, instead of going up to Ubuntu, just boot into safe mode, see if that works. And if that works, then we'll tell you how you can address that permanently. Every time we get a new desktop software release, and this is true across the board, this is true on Linux, this is true on Windows, this is true on Mac OS, what you see time and time again is that the manufacturers of these software continue to imitate or clone things that have worked very well in the mobile operating system space. That started with things like the App Store, right? When I install Linux on a client's machine now, or I introduce a new user to Linux, and they ask me how to install software, and I tell them, it's in the App Store. I say that almost as if it should be an assumed. And the reason I say it as if it should be an assumed is because in 2019, on every other device they use, it is an assumed. that you don't have to you don't go download an APK and run it on your Android device. You just go into the Play Store and you download the app. Okay, you don't download, I have no idea what the extension is for an Apple thing, but you go into the App Store and you download it, the store that's not for apps, right? So we can apply that same logic, and then it makes a lot of sense to new users. They have an app store. Of course, that's where I find all of my applications. And of course, that's only going to continue to become more robust with the advent of things like Snap packages. Much like Android, much like iOS, now we have the ability to control various permissions on the system. And so with 1904, they introduced the ability to control things like notifications. Now, we've had that opportunity to control notifications on Android. We've had the opportunity and the ability to control notifications on iOS. Today, that becomes available to us as Linux users. And I can see myself using the heck out of that, because there are so many times I will get a notification from some application that I don't want to see popping up on my computer. Just this week, I was ripping some CDs in, I believe it was K3B. And every time a CD would get done, it would pop up this thing. Hey, your CD's done. Okay, well, that's great. What that makes me do, or at least in my mind, is, I better put the next one in because I don't want to waste time. So I completely stop what I'm doing, and I put the next disc in, and I was getting ready to prepare for a radio show, and I realize that I have reached a point now where I have blown an hour and a half of my show prep time, because every 10 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever, I'm cycling through to put the next disc in. And I looked briefly for a way if I could just tell, just rip the disc and I'll get to the next one when I think to get to the next one. But my ADD doesn't allow me to ignore things. So having a central place to control notifications, I think, is a really great opportunity for us as Linux users. The other thing they have improved, which I use the heck out of, I have used Redshift on pretty much every machine I've had for the last, 2 years or so. I think it increases my productivity immensely, particularly when we get into the late hours. There is something, and it's very difficult to explain. It's very much a first world problem. I am very entitled, and it sounds very arrogant to say this, but it is the truth. I have a difficult time sitting down at my workstation when I know at 11:30 at night I'm going to get blasted by 6 monitors coming on and blazing white light because of all the Firefox and Thunderbird windows that are open, right? And believe it or not, that actually it is fatiguing to me. And so one of the things that Redshift and programs like it have done allow me to work longer on my computer, and it's more inviting, particularly in the evening hours. I don't have a problem walking down to my workstation and unlocking the thing and starting to work because I'm greeted with kind of a cool light. And if you think I'm crazy, and if you think I'm entitled, and if you think I'm arrogant for saying that, I invite you to check out Redshift, except you don't have to use Redshift because they have their own implementation called Nightlight. And Nightlight actually has some things I like much more than Redshift because it allows you to actually set the color temperature. And again, chat room is kind of echoing what I'm saying. A chat room says, no judgment here. I used Redshift in the middle of the day. It's easier on the eyes when you stare at a screen for 10 hours. Another chatter says, even Windows has a night mode now. It sounds really presumptuous when you say, that's the defining feature of my desktop, is I can use it longer because it changes the screen to a slightly different color. And if you're not familiar with what any of these programs are, they're applications that essentially mimic changing the backlight temperature of your screen to match I have mine set to match the sun. So as the sun begins to set, it changes from bright light during the day and begins to cool the color temperature down from whatever 6,000 K all the way down to 3,000 K, and it almost turns the screen orangish. And if you ever try it, you'll see what I'm talking about. It is a very cool feature, and I'm happy to see that they are continuing to focus on this as a feature of the GNOME desktop. The ability to change color temperatures and set all of that statically, I think, are really great. And of course, if you do anything like photo editing or video editing, obviously you're going to have an uphill battle because you obviously can't do any of those sorts of work if you rely on proper color balancing. Now you can cut clips up, but when you go to do the color correction, make sure to disable that. 1-855-450-NOAH, that's 855-450-6624. You can feel free to add your voice to the conversation, questions or comments on the latest release, 1904 of Ubuntu. The sound settings has gotten some improvements. They have changed from a vertically aligned, they changed to a vertically aligned configuration rather than a horizontal form with tabs. Now, some people prefer that. In fact, one of the blogs I was reading and one of the articles I was using to prepare this show talked about how they prefer all of these settings stacked in a vertical configuration as opposed to horizontally in a tab configuration. Me personally, I prefer the tab configuration. And I prefer that configuration because it categorizes various different settings and allows me to get to that category quickly and efficiently. When I want to change or mute my input volume, I don't want to scroll and read texts all the way down. I just want to jump to the input tab and click on the mute icon or unclick on the mute icon in the event that I want to unmute my microphone, right? If I want to change which output device I am outputting to because I'm in a dock or I've connected a USB sound device of some sort, I don't want to scroll until I find the text identifier that tells me which output is set. I just want to click on the output tab and change a different output. So it's not for me personally, but it is something that I guess some people prefer. And it is a change, so we'll point it out. Now, if you're on the biggest question, should I upgrade? Is it worth my time to upgrade from whatever distro I'm on now or whatever version of Ubuntu I'm on now to 1904? And my answer is the same as it has been pretty much every time we talk about upgrading, and that is this. If you're on an in-between point release, that is to say you are not on an even 04, so 1604, 1804, 2004 is not out, but if 24 would be an even .04. If you're not on an even release of .04, I recommend you stay on that release because that release is an LTS. And the LTS is designed, they put a lot of thought and care into upgrading and the applications that go into it and the software releases, and they do a lot of testing. And so if you like a rock-solid environment, and I do, I stay on the LTS. If you're on one of the in-between releases, if you're in one of the point releases or one of the odd, what we'll call the odd numbers, so 1904, 1810, you'll want to upgrade because the increase in speed alone is worth it. The refinements are worth it. Obviously, you're going to get things like the latest kernel, and now you're good with security updates for this cycle. So for those reasons, you would want to upgrade. And I did two machines. I did a fresh install in one machine that I carried around with me all week, and I'm actually using tonight. And the second machine, I upgraded from I believe it was an 1810 machine. And so we did a single upgrade. I will try in the next couple of weeks to make an upgrade from the .04. I will try and make an upgrade from 1804 to 1904 just to see what happens when you skip one and when you're going from an LTS to a non-LTS, and we'll keep an eye on that and hopefully be back. Again, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email live at AskNoahShow.com. Arcan. That is a powerful development tool and our project spotlight this week, and something that I have been playing with. It is a development framework for creating virtually anything in between your user interface and specialized embedded applications all the way to standalone desktop environments. Now, they have a lot of examples of things that you can do, everything from boot screens to stream media processing. But one of the coolest things that you can do is something called Safe Spaces. And what Safe Spaces does, and we'll have a video link for you in the show notes, it effectively creates infinite desktop screens via VR. And so you can think of it almost as if instead of having desktop work environments, what if I was able to create a virtual desktop screen, that is to say, the same thing that I would have as a GNOME workspace. What if I was able to create one of those, and just every time I create a new one, it goes out into the atmosphere of my VR system, and I can just keep creating them and spanning them right and left, up and down, whichever way I want to do it. And so they have a demo video that shows you how you can do this. This is such a really cool feature. It's such a really cool project. I mean, don't get me wrong. Arcan in and of itself is super powerful and super cool. I had not heard of it. I had not played with Arcan before I came across Safe Spaces. Arcan is what they're using to create Safe Spaces, and it is insanely cool. And so I would suggest that everybody check it out, rather. The other thing that I think it bears some acknowledgement, or something that we at least want to talk about, is what does this mean for VR and Linux? Because up until now, VR has been kind of seen as a gaming infrastructure, has it not? Has it not been seen as something that you use just for entertainment? What if VR is an ability to become more active, proactive, and more efficient when you're using your computer for actual work? Because let me tell you something. When I think about the implications of being able to have an unlimited amount of screens, and the idea that I could sit down in a very comfortable chair and have my workspace as large or as small as I want it to be, and I can zoom in to one screen or zoom back out, that is mind-boggling. Right now, my lab at home, which consists of 6 screens connected to a single machine, and then 2 other ones that are connected to my laptop dock, get shoved into the basement because my wife doesn't want what she calls a bad-looking science project anywhere else in the house but to include my office upstairs. So it gets relegated downstairs to my lab, and that's where I have to work in my little basement lair because I'm not fit for public. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, if I could take my laptop and hook it up to a Thunderbolt dock, and now I have a set of VR goggles, and I can use safe spaces to recreate the workspace I have downstairs. But better than just recreating it, I have the ability to add to it and iterate on it. I think that's really cool. And the people that are doing this, the power alone that is in this RCAM project is absolutely unbelievable. And I'm surprised that hasn't come across my radar, but I'm thankful that it has now, thanks to bringing it to my attention at Q5Sys. And so check that out. Again, we'll have more links for you in the show notes. Definitely something you want to check out. Now, our next guest is Dr. Andy Yen, and I'm super excited to have him on the program. He is the founder and CEO of Protonmail, and a guest this hour on the Ask Noah show. And Dr. Yen, I guess let's start by asking you, who is Dr. Andy Yen? What did you do before Protonmail? What is Protonmail? Give us that 30-second elevator pitch, and why did you create it?
So my background actually is in physics. So I did my PhD in particle physics, and I worked on particle physics at CERN for many years. Protonmail is basically a service similar to Gmail, except it has privacy and security at its core. So it's an email service where we can't read your messages. We don't use your messages to build profiles on you. We don't serve you ads, and we put privacy as a first priority. And the reason we created this service was, we saw back in 2014 that the internet was going to a place where privacy was really disappearing. And there simply were not any private options if you wanted to, have an email service that was usable. And because of that, we decided to build Protonmail to provide consumers with a private option for their email.
The difference with Protonmail is evident from the very, very beginning. From the first time the user clicks on the login page on the Protonmail's website, what is happening when they click on that logon page and they get the dialog box? A little bit is going on there in the background. Tell me that story.
Well, technically what we use is something called end-to-end encryption. And the way end-to-end encryption works is we encrypt, all your messages on the client side. So when you send a message, we encrypt it actually, before it gets to the server. And this prevents the server from actually, being able to read that message. So what's different, of course, is, all the encryption is actually done on your device, and it's done either in the browser or inside the native application if you're using our application, and it's done in a way that's completely invisible to the user, so it's transparent. And the goal of that is we don't want the user to be interrupted. We want to provide basically the same user experience, but also have this layer of encryption built in, which more or less guarantees the privacy protection.
So on the client side, if I'm using the web browser, you have some code that is actually generating a private certificate of sorts inside of the web browser, or is it using standard HTTPS encryption?
No, so it's actually generating a PGP public and private key pair, within the browser, and it's encrypting, using those keys. It's not, TLS that we're doing here. It's actually an encryption that is running in the browser or in the applications, using public-private key cryptography.
You have clients for Android and iOS to prevent any man-in-the-middle attacks. Is there any chance of a desktop client coming soon?
Well, we already have a desktop client called the Protonmail Bridge, and this is basically a software that allows you to achieve end-to-end encryption with Protonmail by using your legacy clients like Outlook, Thunderbird, or Apple Mail. So in fact, we do have a desktop already, but we also are going to in the future develop our own desktop email applications in case you're not a fan of Outlook or Thunderbird and you want to use our own application. So this, of course, is on the roadmap.
We obviously have people that are concerned with privacy from all walks of life, and they use a variety of different operating systems. But when it comes to privacy, I think the vast majority of privacy-conscious computer users tend to use Linux. Does that factor into your decision for a desktop mail client, and will Linux be one of the platforms that you target?
So for Protonmail Bridge, for example, we already have a Linux version. Being on Linux is something that is very, very important for us. Of course, you also look at the audience, right? Protonmail has gone more and more mainstream in the last couple of years. So today, our user base, really does skew to Windows and also to, Mac OS.
Sure.
With Linux being a smaller minority. But, being Linux users ourselves, also being software developers and, former scientists, of course, we ourselves personally, like Linux a lot, and we do spend a lot of effort to try to support and, have tools that work on Linux. And this is something I think, maybe we'll see more and more of as Linux becomes more and more popular, which is also something that we've seen in the last couple of years.
So I have not been following Proton Bridge as carefully as I probably should have. It is still under development, and that's still being worked on?
I think everything is always under development and always being worked on,
sure.
Right? The software is not in beta anymore. It's now been released. I think on Linux it may still be in beta. But of course, software, like any good software, is a work in progress. It's continually adding more features, making it stable, making it faster, making it more secure. There's constant development basically on all of our clients, and we don't see that changing in the future. I think when it comes to security and privacy and usability, there's never a situation where you say, okay, that's good enough, we can leave it alone for now. It's a continual process of improvement because security really is a moving target as the threats evolve.
Absolutely it is. Not everybody is on Proton Mail as much as we might all like them to be. Do you offer a way to provide end-to-end encryption for people that are not using Proton Mail, maybe somebody who is using a not privacy-focused suite like G Suite? Is there a way for them to interact with end-to-end encryption with Proton Mail users?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so there's actually two things, right? Of course, if you are sending email to a lot of people who use Gmail, then Google is going to get a copy of those emails. But what is still quite useful in that situation, of course, is that your inbox, so everything in your sent and in your inbox folder, is encrypted with what we call zero-access encryption, which means that we actually cannot read the things in your inbox. We can't build advertising profiles there. We can't sell the data. And it's also protected in case we ourselves get breached or hacked. So I think, I think everybody, of course, can benefit from technology like Proton Mail. But of course, like communication systems, is with other ecosystem at large, right? And this is why we have chosen to support the OpenPGP standard, because by following the standard, in fact, we're interoperable with any other system out there that also follows the OpenPGP standard. And this is because email is a federated protocol. We think, encryption should not be a walled garden. And this is why, as a company, we're pretty committed to doing things in an open source, open standards way.
Based on your answer, I am led to understand that Proton Mail encrypts data both at rest and in transit. So anytime the data is being stored on your servers, that data is encrypted and not accessible even by staff members at Proton Mail, as well as being encrypted in transit to other Proton Mail users or other people that use OpenPGP. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. So we actually encrypt both ways, in transit and also at rest. And you probably saw the recent story where, I think Hotmail and Microsoft Outlook accounts were compromised because a customer support, agent was compromised. And then, hackers got into the customer support agent's account and were able to view and read emails of, Microsoft users.
Right.
In Proton Mail, because we use the zero-access encryption, that's actually not possible because our staff members themselves cannot read the messages. And we can't read the messages because we don't have the ability to decrypt the inboxes of our users.
Does this mean if a user forgets his credentials or gets subsequently locked out of his account, that means that they themselves can lose access to their own email?
Yes. So we do provide a number of recovery methods, right?
Sure.
So for example, you can export and save a copy of your encryption key in case you forget your password, someday. But of course, if you lose your keys, you lose your password, you lose everything, then that's the nature of security, right? If we can't get into it, obviously we cannot find a way to let you get into it. But it also means that a hacker can get into it too, right? So it's one of the trade-offs that you need to be aware of. What we tell people is, of course, save your password in a safe place, right? Download a copy of your encryption keys so you have that, in case you forget your password. Save your encryption keys in multiple locations so that if you lose your computer or a device, you still have a copy of it somewhere else. But I think this is kind of like the basic, online hygiene techniques I think everybody needs to have, right? It's kind of like you always need to have backups. You always need to, put your password in a safe place, things like that.
Do you see email evolving to meet the security demands of the future, or do you think at some point we abandon email altogether in favor of a newer technology? The reason I ask you that, Dr. Yen, is because as I have watched email evolve and I have watched one iteration after another of a company try to implement security protocols around email, one of the things that I have seen is that it appears to me, and again, I'm not an expert in this field, but it appears to me that email was designed at a time where we didn't really prioritize security, and now the security needs of 2019 have obviously changed a little bit. Is Proton Mail, as you guys are going through your development cycle, do you look and say, you know what, this is a really secure, really comfortable way to exchange messages between one user and another in an encrypted and secure fashion? Or do you look up and say, actually, at some point, if we had the option, we would do a complete overhaul and start from ground zero, and design a secure messaging system from the ground up?
Yeah, I think, if you look at the internet, so actually the World Wide Web was created at CERN back in 1991, right? That's kind of also coincidentally the research institute where Protonmail, was initially developed. So if you look at kind of like the history of the web, it was really a means for, scientists to share information and share data. And security obviously wasn't the highest concern there because scientific research tends to be very open, right? I think, people, when the web was made at CERN in the early 90s, we didn't imagine that we'd be using it for, banking, right? So the needs, of course, of the world have evolved, but the protocols have largely stayed the same. And with email, the challenge is if you want to change the protocol, you need to get every other email service in the world to also change the protocol. And that's the nature of, federated systems, is that, because it's open to everybody, everybody also needs to adapt if you want to change it. And inherently that makes the protocol, very, very difficult to change. But email also, because it's federated and everybody can use it, is actually today the most common form of, communication, right? And your email account essentially is still sort of your online passport. It's really your online identity. All your other accounts are linked, through your email. And for this reason, email, despite being kind of an old protocol, I really don't think it's going to go away. They've been predicting the demise of email since actually the early 90s, right? And even today, it's still kind of going strong. Of course, email will be complemented by other forms of communication, but I think, I can't imagine a world where email is completely gone. And because of that, there are some legacy challenges due to the old protocols, which really limits what you can do. But I believe it's still very important to make an effort to strengthen email security and privacy. And the work that we do with OpenPGP in terms of pushing the standard forward, adding new methods, making it more secure, and modernizing the crypto. These are all things that I think over time can make the email ecosystem more kind of more secure and also really in line with what we expect from modern crypto.
Speaking of open standards, one of the most exciting changes that has come to the latest version of OpenSSH, I believe it's 8.0, is quantum computing resistant keys. Does Proton Mail have any plans or any thoughts of utilizing some of that same technology to become resistant to quantum computing keys?
As a physicist, one of the long-standing jokes in physics community is quantum computing is always 10 years in the future. It doesn't matter which decade you're in, right? I think we don't expect to see quantum computers, let's say, right around the corner, right? It's a technology that obviously will take some time to develop. And at the same time, that's good because that provides a lot of time for the security community to begin working on some of these, post-quantum algorithms to make security, and encryption still work even in the quantum computing world. Here, we're not really in a rush to say, tomorrow implement new algorithms. We're not going to replace, RSA right away, but it's something that we're constantly watching and we're constantly observing. And of course, I think as we get closer, to the date when you can't use RSA anymore, we will of course have migrated by then. But I think it's still a ways off.
A lot of people remember back when Edward Snowden was arrested, the rise and prominence of LavaBit and how that came into the limelight, and they were casted as the email service that provided privacy but allowed Snowden to do what he did. And in that scenario, they were forced to hand over their encryption keys. Dr. Yen, I have to ask you directly, could this happen to Protonmail?
So the architecture is actually quite different, right? We don't actually hold a usable copy of the user's encryption keys. So, that request, if it came to us, would be asking us for something that we simply don't have. So, for that reason, we wouldn't be able to comply to that request. The second thing, of course, is also our legal jurisdiction. Being based in Switzerland, protected by Swiss privacy laws, we also would not be obligated to, provide that information because, under Swiss law, there's no way to force you to hand over encryption keys.
On that note, I wanted to ask, did you choose to base in Switzerland because of the privacy, or was it happenstance? Were you already in Switzerland and you said, hey, I am just at a place and I live in a country that lends itself to being very privacy conscious? How did that come about?
It was actually the second one because, CERN is based in Geneva, Switzerland, and we were already here. And when we actually did the legal analysis, it turns out that Switzerland was a great place for this. So, that made a lot of sense, and that's why we're here.
You've made comments in the past about Google and Facebook and their lack of alignment between user privacy and their business model. That is to say, Google makes money off of selling users' data, and we all know that, and they're pretty upfront and honest about the fact that that's how they fund their business model. Do you think that this is ever going to change in the future, or are services like Gmail, for example, simply too lucrative for them not to data mine their users' data?
I think this really depends on consumer attitudes, right? In 2010, Zuckerberg famously came out and said, privacy is no longer a social norm, right? And then this year, recently, he came out and said that he's going to shift his focus on user privacy, right? This wasn't because he had a change of heart or because his business model changed. He's saying this now because consumer attitudes have shifted. So I think if consumer attitudes continue to shift towards, demanding more privacy and more security, actually, you may see the momentum begin to shift towards services like Protonmail, which are delivering, privacy and security. Largely, of course, services cost money to operate. Google costs money to run. Protonmail costs money to run. And the choice is, how do you pay? And you have two choices there. You pay either with money or you pay with your data and your privacy. And what we're seeing is that I think fewer and fewer people are willing now to, pay for their privacy, and more of them are interested in paying with actual money. And this will, of course, naturally cause the business model of the internet to evolve if consumer sentiment changes.
Obviously, if you want the most out of Protonmail, you offer subscription services in which users pay to utilize your service, and I'm one of those customers. That said, you do offer a free platform, though.
Yes. And we must, because we have a lot of users in countries like China, Russia, or, for example, in Iran, where you can't even use credit cards, that simply don't have the ability to pay us. And, a big part of our mission is enabling, freedom of speech, democracy, and protecting journalists and activists, right? And that part of our mission could not be done if we put a paywall in front of our services. So for this reason, we're highly committed to maintaining a free service. It's not good for profit margins, but I think it's very important for the mission and the impact that we need to have on the world.
Last week, we aired an interview with a chief software engineer from Yubico, a company that makes a hardware security key called the YubiKey. Are there any integration methods with the YubiKey with Protonmail for two-factor authentication, or even better, maybe some plans for FIDO2 down the road? And if not, have you looked into maybe implementing hardware security tokens to increase security?
Yes, so actually we already have an implementation of this that is working and in beta. So we're definitely going down this path. and we're hoping to do the public release of this sometime this year. So that's definitely on our roadmap, and that's one of the features I really want us to get out there actually.
While we're still on the crypto topic, you currently accept Bitcoin as payment for Protonmail for the before mentioned paid plans that you guys offer and some features. Are there any plans to accept maybe additional cryptocurrencies, maybe like Ethereum? Talk about that.
If you look at our suggestion board, right, there's probably hundreds of cryptocurrencies that people want us to accept. There's a time and overhead and efforts adding support for every single one of them, right? It's not something that you can do easily. Payments is also particularly sensitive. If you lose someone's payments, that will really piss them off. So I think, we, of course, cannot support every single cryptocurrency out there. We probably will support a couple more of them, like Ethereum and some of the, bigger and more famous ones. Just because we're a crypto company doesn't mean that we're going to go out and support every single currency that's out there. We'll pick a couple, and I think that's probably the best that we can do. By and large, cryptocurrencies is still relatively niche in terms of overall payment volume.
Additionally, it's fairly simplistic and fairly straightforward to transfer between one cryptocurrency and another. So if you're I don't mine Bitcoin, but I spend a lot of Bitcoin, there's nothing stopping me from mining whatever currency I decide or cryptocurrency I decide to mine, converting that into Bitcoin, and then using that to purchase goods and services like Protonmail.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So this is why for us, we think it's sort of already, in some ways, kind of a solved problem. Of course, we can improve it a little bit, but it's a tough one, right? And in terms of allocating our resources, it's at this time, not the best place to put all our resources.
We touched on the Protonmail bridge a little bit, but for those that maybe haven't heard of it, can you tell us what the Protonmail bridge is?
Well, the bridge is basically a software that sits between, our servers and your local mail client. Of course, if you use Thunderbird or Apple Mail, that doesn't do any end-to-end encryption. So what it does is it passes messages to the bridge. The bridge applies the encryption and then communicates with our servers. So it's a way for you to get end-to-end encryption, but still keeping your existing email client and your existing email experience.
Generally speaking, what are some of the areas that you're focusing on the advancement and development of Protonmail? Obviously, there are a lot of things that you could choose to concentrate on. All of them are very good from my experience, but like you said, everything is always a moving target. Are you looking at stronger security, a different UI design, additional features? What is coming next for Protonmail?
Essentially all the above, right? Our priority, of course, is always security and reliability. And we always spend, most of our efforts on ensuring that from a security and reliability standpoint, we are kind of at the cutting edge. So that's priority one. Second thing, of course, is usability. So we do expect to see actually a pretty major UI revamp coming out this year. And third after that really is what I call, kind of expanding the ecosystem, right? Email is great. But if you can have email with calendar and also file storage, that's even better. And that's really where I think the long-term vision is kind of building out the entire suite of products that Google has, but doing it in a way that puts consumers first and puts privacy first. Let's
dig into that a little deeper. Talk a little bit about Proton Drive. What's the general idea of Proton Drive? Where are they in the development process, and when might we see that come to fruition?
Well, it's a big project, right? Especially on the infrastructure side. So I think we're looking probably, between 1 and 2 years before we get to the release. But the idea, of course, is, email is closely tied to, file storage. Everybody that uses Protonmail would also like to have a secure online file storage. So we could use end-to-end encryption that we pioneered on, mass consumer email and also adopt it to, file storage. Then I think, that adds a lot of value to our existing users. And that's what we want to do, going forward. It's obviously a lot of work because we host all of our infrastructure in Switzerland for security and privacy reasons. So that requires, building out, massive infrastructure here in Switzerland to support the data volumes that Proton Drive would attract.
Further digging into the idea of an ecosystem that provides privacy and security for your users, talk about Proton VPN. What led to the decision not only to run an email service, but to jump into the business of VPNs?
It's actually quite logical. A lot of countries, I would say, don't really stand for what Protonmail stands for. And we've had incidents in the past, for example, where, Turkey blocked us for a few weeks. Russia tried to block us, for a few weeks. And these sort of situations we expect to come up more and more, as we expand and grow. So the idea of providing Proton VPN as a free VPN service is really so that, if our users in a certain country start having issues connecting to Protonmail, by using Proton VPN, they can still get access to the Protonmail service. So that's kind of the logic behind why we decided to launch a VPN service.
As giant Linux nerds, I'd be somewhat remiss if I didn't ask you what the likelihood of being able to integrate things like WireGuard now that it has become part of the Linux kernel. Obviously, WireGuard being the VPN client that's built into the Linux kernel that is touted as a very robust, clean implementation of a VPN by Linus Torvalds himself. We have played with it here on the Ask Noah show and provided a tutorial to users on how to get it up and running. Is that something that ProtonMail would consider?
Yes. Actually, last Christmas, we actually ran a fundraiser together with WireGuard to raise money for WireGuard development. So it's something that we're watching very closely and definitely supporting. And it's on the roadmap, so I think we'll see it sooner or later. It's quite advanced, of course, on Linux, but compared to OpenVPN and IPv2 protocols, it's still, I would say, a decade behind in terms of stability and platform support. But I think it's developing very quickly, and it may soon get to the stage where we can deploy it on a large scale.
You and your team have built an email service with privacy and security foremost principles, and I love that about ProtonMail. It's why I'm a ProtonMail user. It's why I encourage all of my listeners to be ProtonMail users. For all of the aspiring people that are out there and motivated by hearing you talk, they are listening to you and they're saying, this is so cool. What Dr. Andy Yen has accomplished is awesome, and what his team has accomplished is fantastic, and the product that they're making is great. If they want to go and create something, do you have any general business issues, tools, or advice that you could give to that person that's out there that wants to create the next thing designed with security and privacy in mind as its core foundation?
Yeah, the advice that I would give to people is whatever you do, I think you should make sure that you have the proper alignment, between your project and also your users. So if your interests are fully aligned with your users' interests, this will do two things. First, it will build a community which will support the project. And two, it will really, kind of avoid you having to make some of these, maybe sometimes, ethical choices about whether you're doing the right thing or not, right? So I think it's, of course, in business very important to, do the ethical things, build technology that's actually for the good of mankind. And if you can align your business model with your users' interests, then you can achieve that. And I think, that alignment really, builds a community that can sustain and support any enterprise. So that's something that I recommend that you always look for the first thing whenever you start a project. You
mentioned earlier in the interview that one of the primary reasons that you support Linux, even though it has a small market share, is you yourself are a Linux user. Can I ask, what distro do you prefer and why?
So we use a lot of CentOS and Red Hat. That's very popular within Proton.
You are in good company then, because I am one of the biggest Red Hat fanboys you'll ever meet. So that I find them to be a very robust and enterprise-grade product, and I'm happy to hear that you too are a CentOS user. Dr. Andy Yen, he is the CEO and founder of ProtonMail and a guest this hour on the Ask Noah show. Dr. Yen, thanks so much for taking the time to be here with us. We'll get you back in the program real soon.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. I hope that was interesting for the audience as well.
Yeah, you bet. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. We ran a little late into the Linux Newswire. We go with Eric, the IT guy. Here he is.
From the Linux Newswire studio, this is the Weekly Roundup with Eric, the IT guy.
Hey, Noah. Happy to be with you again, and here are your Linux and open source headlines. Canonical, maker of the Ubuntu Linux distribution, continues to work with companies all across the industry to provide more and more software in an accessible, easy-to-use, universal packaging suite. Their latest addition, Microsoft Open Source Code Editor Visual Studio Code. To date, the community had been providing a VS Code snap package. However, now it is officially released and supported by Microsoft. This brings the advantage of a containerized application, easy to install, and automatic updates to one of the most popular IDEs currently available, and provides Linux support right out of the box. In other news on the universal packaging front involves the release of Fencible on Electron. Fencible is a product of ChartIQ as a desktop integration platform that allows users to define their own dashboards. This includes data analytics applications like Yellowfin, encrypted data transfer by iPushPull, and many others. ChartIQ helps design software for companies to help manage their new and legacy systems to help track business performance and financial data. By porting Fencible to Electron, the open source web container means that their growing suite of tools is now platform independent and can be utilized on all major operating systems, including Linux. Mozilla recently spotlighted a new release for Hubs. Hubs is a sister project to Firefox Reality, an effort to continue development of open source, mixed reality social platforms. Hubs is a growing web-based application built to allow VR interactions of users with their friends with nothing more than a URL. No software or add-ons needed to install. Their latest release includes a Discord bot in beta to allow a Hubs bridge with Discord, improved moderation support, and snapshot support of live streams. Mozilla values the work being done on mixed reality platforms as it will enhance the experience of online interactions. Check it out today at hubs.mozilla.com. eSecurity Planet, a security-focused technology journal, published a roundup of interviews and studies identifying the key attack vectors and most sought-after technologies for 2019. Their conclusion was that attacks, attack success, and attack sophistication were all on the rise at an alarming rate. Accenture, a global IT provider, saw that malware attacks are costing 11% more year after year, and an estimated $2.6 million per attack in 2018. CyberEdge, a vendor research and marketing company, reported that over 78% of reported cyber attacks are successful. FireEye, a security development company, reported that in 2018, the average time to recovery was approximately 50.5 days. These reports all paint a gruesome picture of the status of data security in our growing world of gadgets and connectivity. Experian released a study that shows only 36% of polled organizations have a plan, conduct drills, and have the appropriate tools in place to combat data breaches. Accenture's report provides some keys, however, to combating these threats. Invest in systems automation, be able to deploy new infrastructure as needed, build up orchestration of these systems, deploy and enforce pre-built configuration and softwares to all systems, and CyberEdge added that machine learning and executive buy-in will be keys to alerting and defending against security threats in today's world. For Linux Newswire Studio, I am Eric the IT Guy. Now, Noah, back to you.
A bit of feedback I wanted to air, mostly because I just want to respond to some of the things that the gentleman wrote. And he says in his feedback, Noah, this letter may sound like a backhanded compliment. I give you my word, I intend it only as a positive thing. But in order for me to contextualize it, I must tell you some of my initial less than positive reactions to you. I was perpetually involved in radio in the early 70s for a short while. Joe Collins, in a recent YouTube video, presented that he discussed not liking some Linux YouTubers because they tried too hard to be professional, and I agreed with some of what Joe said. In general, even people I don't personally care for, I appreciate the tremendous amount of efforts and soul they put into making their videos. And then he goes on to explain and give some examples and cite some specific examples of the kind of presentation and the kind of presenters that he doesn't care for. Of course, I'm included in that. I'm shortening that up to be a little bit more short and concise. The feedback goes on to say, Noah, I thought you were like some of these other guys. You sound like them. In terms of your professional radio voice and glibness, this is not an insult. Trust me, I'm as glib as they come, but I'm not a knee-jerk kind of guy. So I generally just boycott these folks. When you turned up on Destination Linux, I was startled and thought, well, fine, these guys like him. That's Jake with me. I can live with it. The more I listened to you, the more I thought, despite how Noah presents, I tend to agree with a lot of what he says, an unusually lot of what he says. So naturally, I started paying even closer attention to you. Then I started to think, maybe this guy is genuine. The more I listened to you, the more you came off as warm, funny, and a friendly guy. Then I saw that you were independent and affiliated with the DL group. Super for my tastes. That's a step way up. And now, when I listen to you, especially with your interview the other day in the Meet Each Member of the DL series, I found you to be a pretty terrific guy. You seem to be more about just monetizing on Linux. You seem to have a true passion for it and a concern for the community. So now, you can number me among your fans. It makes sense if Zeb and Ryan and Mark like you. That's it's going to be Michael. But I'd find you worthy too. So again, we have a happy ending. I now number you among the people that I recommend highly for anybody looking for YouTube Linux videos. I'm delighted to have bookmarked the Ask Noah show on my browser, and I hope honestly that you'll take my misgivings aren't offensive to you. I think what your show is and what it's become, I keep an open mind. You are a passionate guy who can overcome any misgivings and win someone over. And so what I wanted to say to that, and I read this not on the air to pat myself on the back, but I read that so I can publicly address a couple things. First of all, please send in critical feedback. We don't promote the YouTube channel. We don't promote the YouTube version of the show. You can find it at youtube.com/AskNoah. We put it there because we're told by people, hey, I listen to your show on YouTube. That's the way I choose to subscribe. And that's fine. And I understand that YouTube is where the eyeballs are. We just don't put a lot of time into it because I just don't care for the platform. I don't want to give Google any more money or any more time than I absolutely have to. But you as the listener are valued. Don't mistake that. I don't value YouTube, the platform. I value you, the listener. And I had a guy last week leave me a comment on YouTube that says, and I quote, "I promise this is the most informative Linux show out there." And I cannot even begin to put into words what that means to me when I read stuff like that. And so positive feedback is definitely appreciated. But critical feedback is equally, if not more important, because it allows us to direct the show and allows us to make changes to impact the show. 90% of people who don't like the show will just shut it off, they'll unsubscribe, and I will never hear from them. And so this is me asking you, the listener, to be critical and let us know how we can make it better. But the second thing I wanted to point out, and Kapavik and I just got into a discussion about this in the chat room, it took a little bit for this show to find its feet. Over 2 years, I would say we have made some drastic changes from the way episode 1 went to the way this episode 124 has gone. And so if you know somebody that hasn't listened to the show for a while, would you please invite them back? Would you please let them know that we've continued to iterate on the show? And I finally feel pretty comfortable that this show has found its power swing. And it seems like you, the listener, agree because that's what I'm seeing in the feedback. I believe we're there. So please help us spread the word. When we tweet out an episode that the latest episode is out, you don't know how much it helps us to retweet that, to share that on social media, to share the links on Facebook. All of those things help us spread the word of the show, and it attracts guests like Dr. Andy Yen, who then come and say, I want to come on the show because I care about presenting on the Ask Noah show. Hey, we continue next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. Huge thanks to Sarah, our call screener, Ben, our producer. There's plenty of more content for you 24/7 at AskNoahShow.com. We'll see you next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central.